Welcome back, folks, to episode 161 of the Running Man Self-Regulation Skills Project podcast with me, your host, Dr. Armando Dominguez, PhD in health psychology, licensed professional counselor, and an adjunct professor at a local community college. What we're going to be discussing today has to do with loss of agency. Whenever I feel like I've lost my sense of I can control this or I'm in control, not only of situations, but myself in particular. So whenever we're under stress, we feel like we have to choose, and there's a sense of urgency and need for certainty about it. So what we're going to be pointing out today is what choice under pressure looks like, and also the stress that narrows choice, and what that can kind of look like, what we think like, and how to prevent that and keep that from taking control of our lives. One thing as human beings is that we like to feel like we're in control of ourselves and that we have control of circumstances in our environment, whether it be family, work, or in situations where you're out and about in the marketplace, out in public doing what you do, interacting. But often, whenever we have pressure, we have stress, we could have the worries of our day having to do with paying our bills, going to work, making money, and also having projects at work that are due, or maybe interacting with people that are unsavory or really hard to deal with. If you work with human services, for instance, populations can be very difficult and hard to predict, so to speak. So that can create pressure where we feel like we're being driven more so by the pressures of the external environment than we are by what's going on inside of me. So what happens is when stress occurs, our heart rate tends to go up. Our breathing changes in the sense that we're starting to bring in more air, and our sympathetic tone goes up. That means we have more tension in the body. We're also becoming a little more vigilant in a very small way in many cases if it's not actually threatening to you, but the vigilance level goes up or awareness goes up. Rarely do you hear somebody call an increase in awareness a level of vigilance, but that's really what it is, because it's a protective factor. The next thing about stress is that it tends to narrow what we perceive as what we can choose, depending on how fast and sudden the onset of stress, but also how intense it may seem and whether or not I take it as potentially threatening or maybe not threatening right now, but where I see the potential being that somebody may be acting in a way that they may be very tense and maybe what they're doing is modeling or showing a behavior that seems to be tense or one that might seem threatening or one that could potentially become threatening. And this kind of thing is called bravado, but it's also something that signals neurologically to us whether or not there's potential tension that could develop into stress that is more dangerous and threatening to us. So things to pay attention to, of course. But stress narrows choice. We can't see as many choices because we start looking at priority. What is the best choice to make in the moment? And what's going to be the thing that supports my own organismic survival in the immediate moment if it gets that tense? It makes it harder to make those higher level thinking strategies work. Doesn't mean that they don't work, but at some point they stop working whenever our blood flow leaves the front part of our brain. Our executive function suffers. That means we also have less of a sense of time and timing because we become more focused and anchored more correctly because of our bodily stress into the immediate right now. So more precisely, it narrows access. Stress narrows access to our ability to choose. What we start losing is that awareness that choice is still possible, under pressure especially. Under pressure, behavior begins accelerating towards habit, towards urgency, familiar reaction, and survival-based patterning. The person may feel, in quotes, I had no choice. But often choice disappeared gradually as awareness narrowed. Now, this is something that, as stress goes up, our ability to move and choose more quickly happens because we tend to jettison or maybe attend less to other potential options, but we can't make sense of them or strategize with them because there may be a component of time involved or one where there are steps involved to actuate those things. So we tend to prioritize based in a very efficient manner what's going to take the least amount of effort. And if it's not something that requires creativity in the moment, if things have gotten that stressful, that means it's not going to be anything novel that we're going to be choosing, nothing new. And we're probably not going to be choosing an unknown because that eats up mental capital. Whatever energy we have, executive function-wise, will get eaten up if we're trying to be creative in the process of doing what we're doing that may be stressful as far as an event or an interaction, this sort of thing. But the compression of choice, that is what we're looking at. Under calm conditions, a person can usually consider multiple interpretations of things pretty easily. We have a very broad sense of it. We have a broad sense of time and orderliness in the sense that this can take maybe a day, this will take an hour, this takes 10 minutes, and we can put them in a timely order that makes sense to us, that we can strategize thereafter. Several responses, we can take a look at different ones, and if I do this, this will happen. If I do this, we start contingency thinking. Whenever the compression of choice is occurring because of stress, these things tend to become a little more difficult. We can delay action. Whenever it's the beginnings of it, we still have the ability to suspend whatever it is, not so much the choice, but our action on that choice that we may be making, being able to weigh it more effectively. If we can delay action, that means that sense of delayed gratification, if it's a good thing, is as much as a delayed gratification of doing something that'll keep me alive. It's not so far-fetched from each other. So we take into consideration what the payoff is in a sense, and we're able to think about it in time. That's an important part right there. Long-term outcomes, we can see in time. We can see into the future expectation prediction. Doesn't mean we're actually seeing what's going to happen, but we can see with a great deal of likelihood and probability what may or may not work best. And we can adjust along the way. If we're at this level or state of stress, that we can still think with and use a sense of time and timing whenever we're planning what we're going to do in the next moment. Under stress, this compresses. The system prioritizes immediate action. Immediate action is a lot about fast resolution. Fast resolution is reduction of uncertainty, but it's also a reduction of stress. And that uncertainty, we can rename that and call it the unknown or novel, in the sense that it's something that's so ambiguous or so unknown to us that it will take energy just to make sense of it and put it in our mental world, so to speak. We're probably not going to do that. And that's an important point to pay attention to as well. How do I process under stress? And when do things get to the point where it's like all bets are off and I'm taking choice number one because I'm familiar with that? Sometimes familiar is not the best option, but it may be an option that I've taken before and it's worked out before, and I hedge my bets on that sometimes. Options begin to feel fewer. Reaction feels necessary. Not everything that happens requires action. But if a reaction feels necessary, that means we have a stress-borne belief that just jumped. It just developed as a result of what's going on. We feel and then start believing that there is a need to do, when in actuality there may be more of a need to think, if we can. But if we're losing that capacity, that mental capital, blood flow moving, carrying sugar, going to the skeletal muscles, making us a lot stronger but a little dumber because it's no longer in our frontal lobe, well, we have an issue here. And that's where the reaction starts feeling necessary, because we tend to be much more perceptually dominant. That means whatever it is that I'm seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, and yes, I said taste. And I've known that there are people out there that lick things to get a sense of, and not making fun of it. It's part of the whole spiel. Same thing with touch, tactile. We actually become perceptually dependent more than dominant, so to speak. Dependent is probably a more correct term. And that means that we tend to lean on that a little more in the moment. Now, this is like proto-thinking stuff that will actually shape and give us a lens that we're looking through and not aware that somebody changed our glasses, so to speak. So pay attention to this, because it does shift, but also influence how it is that not only how we think, but how we strategize and interpret things out in our environment that may or may not be correct, but we may take things at face value. What they look like is how they are, and that could lead to problems. So those are the assumptive reasoning issues that can create some big problems. And no matter how good your heart may be, if you assume things, you could put people in danger and not know it. So once again, a very important thing to pay attention to. As the reaction becomes that feeling of feeling necessary, as activation rises, reaction feels justified. There's a sense of rightness to it whenever we're in action. Action will always move you in a direction. Not always the best direction, but it's better than standing still. And that stems from much of the organismic survival in an environment wherever, like an animal, like a little deer, or even a little bunny will stay still right in the face of you. But if you take into consideration the color of their coat, they tend to have that brassy, brownish look that if they're in the dry grass in the fall, the more still they are, the more they look like that. And most animals, even some of the predators, have a certain color blindness about them to a degree, not perfectly, where they can't break that. If they see them moving, they will move to where the space displaces, because it's like the Mona Lisa. If you're at the Louvre and you go and look and see, and then the smile moves, you freak out a little bit. Why? Because the whole space is supposed to be still. the assumption. But if you move, there's a displacement of space where the mouth was no longer smiling, or maybe she smiles more, sticks her tongue out, and then you're like, what the heck? And that's an important thing. Whenever we're in that still freeze mode, that's a protective mechanism. But whenever we're seeking out, often our ability to act or move increases our chances of survival by virtue of surprise. Whenever there is this still moment, there's that shock value where not only did you displace space, timing wise, you just bought some. Now you can run. And that's an important thing, once again, too. That's not often spoken about, but we as humans, we have this too. As activation rises, once again, reaction feels justified, but urgency creates the sense that I have to act. I have to respond now. There is no time. Notice the narrative sound. That means that this is a signal perceptual that went up to my higher brain that I made sense and words. I added words to it. I added narrative. This is not always true. But the state makes it feel true because there's that sense of urgency of action. Action is survival. Don't be still. If you're frozen, you better stay frozen, because otherwise you break camouflage and you'll get eaten. You become the bologna sandwich. But once you break camouflage, the body pushes towards action before reflection fully returns. So we're not really reflecting. What we're doing is sorting for higher priority. We're making sense of things. And the thing is, the highest priority is one of egress. Where can I go where there is no that's trying to chase me and eat me, this sort of thing. What about in our everyday lives when we have bills to pay, when we have jobs to do, when we interact with people that are very difficult to deal with? We have similar feelings along the lines of this. I used to be on the plains 10,000 years ago, and therefore, I react this way. Our nervous system is made to react to things physiologically first, not intellectually, but physiologically first. And intellect, of course, is a physiological process, but you understand. Agency narrows before it disappears. And this is really the important part of this whole message, in that whenever we start having that sense of urgency, we start feeling like we're no longer controlling, but rather we're being driven or being controlled by something outside of me or something within me that is making choices for me that I wasn't fully there for. And this is where we have that backseat driver effect. I've talked to many people. I've had this experience as well, wherever they're saying that, they were doing something, but it felt like someone else was driving, or they were watching themselves being driven or doing the activity, but it felt like they were in the backseat of the car and someone else was driving. And that is not a bad thing in all cases, but it can feel like a bad thing in some, because that could be a dissociation quality if there is anything scary or traumatic or frightening, this sort of thing, or even painful for that matter, where we start hearing people that are floating out of body and stuff. The NDE stuff is very closely tied to that. But in the higher, more generative sense, we're looking at flow, like Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi came about hypothesizing about that. It essentially became a theory of mind at peak experience, of optimal experience, more correctly. And we have that sense of being one with what you're doing. And it's like you're watching yourself, but not from behind, but rather like you're integrated. You're in your eyes. You're not in the back of your mind looking out of these eyes or seeing your self-drive from that aspect of self, your true self, that sees your thoughts arise. If you can observe your own thinking, you know where your self is. Always, that's you. But at the same time, whenever you have this kind of experience where there's stress, we can have that sense of someone else or something else is driving, because our reactivity is that fast. And sometimes if we think about what the speed of reaction is from us to the environment, or the environment signaling, and then we respond, we have this reflex arc. We have an arc of thought process that occurs. We're talking fractions of a moment. Within the range of thousandths of a second, 13 thousandths of a second, there is no recognition of friend or foe. There is only threat, and you move away from it, or you fight it if it's too sudden onset and you can't run from it. So it's a very deep thing. Our agency narrows before it disappears. It doesn't go away completely, but we feel like it's running distantly and I can't reach it. Most people do not lose agency all at once. It narrows step by step. First, the perception narrows. That's wherever you start getting more like tunnel vision. You start having some auditory exclusion. You can hear deep, gross tones, but the mellifluous sounds of somebody singing high pitch, you can't differentiate the differences very well now, and it could become irritating. Also, you lose some fine motor skill in your vocal cords, and your voice sounds really loud and gross versus sounding fluid and mellifluous. Once again, it doesn't sound as pretty as it used to. And often we lose fine motor skill. Gross motor skill becomes the dependent aspect, in that we start moving big muscles. And when you used to be able to pick coins off the table with your fingertips, you no longer can. You have to swipe them off into your palm by sweeping them with your hand, because you're using all the big muscles. You're a lot stronger, you're a lot faster, and we've lost some cognitive capacity, executive function, because of that stress when we get to a high enough level of stress. But perception narrows, then interpretation hardens. That means we think more concretely. We tend to take things as they are, the way they look, versus looking for nuance. We have lost our filter for nuance at that point. That's an important detail to pay attention to. Then whenever urgency rises, then behavior commits. That's where we become much more committal towards the things that we do, based on a belief that arises because I tend to believe things to be as they are, where we may be lacking some information. It's inaccurate, but largely accurate, but not perfectly inaccurate, but accurate enough that I'll hedge my bet on that if it means survival or the lessening or alleviation of whatever stress is stressing me. And if that feels better after the fact, then maybe I did well. But by the time action occurs, a person may already feel carried by momentum. Important detail there as well. Choice requires awareness. Now, choice becomes available again when awareness re-enters the process. And it does come back. Part of it's blood flow. Part of it is ambient sense of safety. My assumption of safety, in quotes, is being met. And what is that assumption of safety? Well, where I no longer feel threatened or feel like I'm getting triggered by my environment, and I tend to know what is going on, and I'm able to make choices and be able to think about things in a predictive and expected manner. So those things tend to return, but also that sense of pressure, heart rate going up, breathing changing. Doesn't feel like you're exercising while you're sitting still. You're actually cooling off. You have more parasympathetic tone, means you're able to inhale deeply and let go of that stress, and you have a deep exhale that allows your abdomen to loosen and allows you to breathe more deeply with less effort, and it's no longer the bellows breath that awakens a sympathetic tone. This may begin with something small. You may notice the breath. You may recognize tension leaving. Seeing escalation forming, you can see that on the way up, but you can also see it more effectively when you start cooling down. Hearing urgency in your own voice can trigger that response. It doesn't just have to be from outside. It doesn't just have to be your thoughts are bringing on anxiety, and therefore I have anxiety because of that. No, sometimes your own voice. Are you shocked in the moment and you gasp, oh my goodness, you have this tone, that tends to trigger the safety response in people. It may be subtle. Some people overly respond, and you may note that. Sometimes just speaking about certain subjects, you may notice people start blinking quickly, almost like the mental pictures are turning on. They keep having to close their eyes because they don't like what they're seeing. We have to pay attention to these subtleties. Regulation protects agency. So if we're learning self-regulatory skills, which this whole podcast is about for the last 3 years, the purpose of regulation is not emotional suppression. You don't want to stop having emotion. That is preserving access to those things that are most important in the moment that help me function. And that is my sense of timing, how I do what I'm doing, yes, but with that sense of when I'm doing it, and if I should do it, and when it's going to occur whenever I act certain ways. We have a sense of that in time. Perspective, the way we look at things. If we tend to be under stress or in chronic pain, our lens is going to be a little dark and heavy. I will give you a very immediate, for instance, that happened. I've been struggling with some hip bursitis and back pain. I got a little snappish with my son. I called and I apologized, and he knew. But the thing is, I felt bad about it. I felt guilty because I somehow felt like I let him down. But fact of the matter is, I didn't say anything angrily. It's just I was experiencing a spike in discomfort at that moment because I'd sat in a very soft couch, and I probably shouldn't have done that. That was my mistake. But yet it came out a little gruff and not malintended, but that's just kind of how it came out. But this sort of thing, we have to recognize what are the stressors that caused me to respond in a certain way. That my perspective was a little dark and not hopeless necessarily, but one that was a little short whenever I should have been probably a little more patient because there wasn't anything requiring me to get upset about things. I just felt the physicality of it, and my lens shifted a little bit, how I was seeing things, and I was able to reconcile that, of course. But flexibility and response, we tend to lose some of that. We tend to pay attention to those irritations that are occurring in the moment that may or may not be causing the stress, or that may possibly cause the stress, that predictive aspect, and that we may expect to cause the stress. I've seen this and done this before, but that protects our agency because we can lean on our experience and be able to plan and provide a little bit of space and time, if we can, between what is happening, what hasn't happened yet, and what might become a bad experience if it does. So we can lean more effectively on past history, and that's a good thing. So how else can we protect agency, our own sense of I've got control of this, or I'm in control of self, or feel like I'm able to act with some positive effect on whatever it is that I'm doing, wherever it is that I am, interacting with whomever it is that I'm interacting with, good, bad, or indifferent. Without regulation, the system defaults towards automaticity. With regulation, choice remains accessible longer. That means we have more power in the moment to be able to choose, and the environment's not going to pick for us. We're not going to lose our ability to pick whatever direction it is I want to go, or choice I need to make that's going to encourage a better outcome for me. And it can be a survival level thing, but it's driven by survival level wiring. And it can be more so a practical thing. Less stress, paying my bills on time, and we have less of extra fees that we're paying because we're paying later, whatever. So planning is certainly affected by that regulation in particular. Now, the nervous system prefers familiar action, and this is one of the things that can take us into a loop. That is not a bad thing, because it can be a useful loop if we're gaining skill and practicing to learn to become a better ballet dancer, a better martial artist, a better coach, a better weightlifter, whatever it is that we do. The more important thing is that under pressure, the body wants efficient response. This means returning to practice reactions. So those things we practice most are the things that we fall to. And we fall to our level of practice, but also our systems, the things that we systematically, automatically, repetitively, every day, day in, day out, 364, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. I don't know what year I'm living. I think I'm missing a day somewhere. But with all joking aside, if we do this year round, 52 weeks a year, then that's a very practiced experience that we may become not only familiar with, but masterful, so to speak. We become unconsciously competent, and that's the level of response that we go to. Practiced reactions, known emotional pathways, same thing. Whenever we're behaving, there's a certain feel to every do that we do. And if we pay attention to those things that give us joy, dance, joy, martial arts in my case, joy, I don't know, maybe writing something with your pen and paper and becoming a published author, I think that provides joy too. And I have just recently experienced that, and I know that, but the reason I throw that out there is that we have different levels of activity with different levels of emotional attachment with that, or emotional baggage in a way if it's negative, but more so some carryover that we tend to familiarize ourselves with. So it's not just what we do that's the pattern. It's what we feel as we're patterning, as we're doing that said pattern, as we're doing that repetitive action. So we really must pay attention. So this is why deliberate training matters. In stress, people return to what has been rehearsed. And it is practice, just like you go into theater. Went to training this past week, and 2 theater folks were putting on a presentation. Amazing chemistry. I really enjoyed them. And on top of that, the practice quality of how they're able to express that energy emotionally and be able to express that to the crowd was very well shown whenever they were doing their presentation, and I saw it as a great expression of excellence, but also something they'd done before. So we return to what has been rehearsed. Delayed action can be powerful. Not all strength is immediate movement. Sometimes timing's the best thing. The strongest action is pausing, observing longer, reducing intensity first, waiting for better timing. Sometimes regulating the intensity versus acting may give us better choices after the fact. This is not weakness. It is maintaining agency instead of surrendering to urgency, because urgency drives and it gives that sense of I need certainty, but also need to get rid of the sense of uncertainty or that sense of unknown or I don't know, because that's way uncomfortable. Ambiguity makes a nervous system nervous, and the less ambiguous, the more calm we can become, because we can account for something that's going on in our environment. We know what it is. We can recognize it. It's when we're in unrecognized circumstances where we may experience peak experiences good and bad, optimal experiences, wherever our body is at peak awareness and vigilance, and that stresses you out. But it also eats up energy and attention. You never have to pay attention in the truest sense. To correct myself from earlier saying pay attention, we have to be attentive too, because our attention's always on. It never turns off. Our attention isn't just a cognitive process. It's an environmental, totally organismic process that we have. And that keeps us not only safe, but alive, but aware to what's going on. It's our so-called antenna, if you will. So delayed action can be powerful. Not all strength is immediate movement. Observing longer is a great thing. Reducing intensity. By reducing intensity, that intensity is what pushes that sense of wanting to do or feeling or believing that we have to do or choose right now. Now, preserving choice in high stress is a goal. It's not perfect calm under pressure. It is preserving enough regulation to keep access to choice alive. Even partial awareness matters. You don't have to be fully aware of every perfect detail that's occurring, but being aware, that's the bottom line. That's the important thing. One conscious breath can interrupt automatic progression. That means you choose to breathe. Choose to do the box breath or the neurological side. Don't do a deep breath first whenever you're under stress. That will awaken your sympathetic nervous system. Do the double sniff, extended exhale, or do the breath down and the abdominal expansion. That's the center down that I teach in the Running Man model. In the immediate moment, instead of inhaling and gasping, you're exhaling. Because if you're burning more fuel, that means you're making more CO2. You don't want to recycle that and go into hypervent. But not only that, it centers you and it actually calms your mind. It kind of stops the monkey thought process that's going on. So no racing thoughts occurring when you do that. And then once you do that, you start stilling your breath. Important things. That and staying nice and calm and keeping your arms nice and relaxed to your sides and no fists, of course. You want your hands and fingers open. Kind of like a gunfighter, but not with the twitchy finger where it looks like you're going to draw. But you understand. Freedom exists in small spaces. People often imagine freedom dramatically. But under stress, freedom is often very small. It's not William Wallace with the horse running with the flag screaming freedom. It is under stress that freedom is often very small. A pause, a softened posture. That's wherever the pivot point occurs. A different tone. Sometimes it's a decision not to escalate. Knowing that escalation's there, but choosing not to engage. Really important. Small choices change trajectories. In a mind as well as in a body, just a small pivot of even a half a degree over a long enough timeline will take in a very different direction than what you were originally planning to go. So, really important thing to pay attention. Stress tends to narrow awareness until reaction feels inevitable. And sometimes inevitability is often the result of unrecognized progression. Choice doesn't disappear instantly. It fades as regulation fades and returns as awareness returns. The work of self-regulation is not becoming emotionless. It is preserving enough access to yourself that choice remains possible, even under stress, because that is where agency lives. And agency changes outcomes. That means you maintain and continue to recognize that you not only have a choice in the matter, but you have an opportunity to make a difference in the direction that you want to go. And it doesn't feel always like the most sterling, I have control of everything in my life, but you at least have a choice within the matter and you don't feel like you're being bandied back and forth between hands and then you're the ball, like the ping pong ball bouncing back and forth. You have some sense of agency and control. And that's an important thing to have day to day. Whenever we're little, we want to become independent. Whenever we're little, and granddaughter, for instance, she's like, no, let me do it. And she's learned to say, I can't. But at the same time, she says that when she's frustrated, but then continues to repeat and do, which is a good behavior. But the important thing is that we have to remember that that sense of agency is about independence. Independent individual, independent choices. It doesn't mean that we don't get help from anybody and that nobody helps us and I get here all by myself. No such thing, such a myth. But at the same time, we realize that we're able to do more. That means we have a sense of willingness and capacity, and we recognize our own self-efficacy in the things that we choose, the things that we do, and the things that we pursue and want to become. So those are important details there. So as far as agency, how do I protect it? We kind of covered it. And how do I recognize what my agency looks like under stress? Well, whenever we start feeling that sense of heart rate going up, breathing changing, and we start getting more vigilant, that's when we start realizing that agency may start to slip away from us, and it's going to feel like someone or something else is affecting us. This is where groupthink becomes very, very dangerous, and also mob mentality, because our influence as an individual becomes less by virtue of the intensity of the emotions of that mob or that group or that workspace or that family. You don't have to be part of it, but if you can maintain your center down that I talked about earlier, wherever you exhale out whenever the stress starts versus inhale and gasp and take the surprise, and your spine wakes up and your sympathetic nervous system gets all warm and ready to run. Instead of that, you can stand in space. You can stand centered in courage and not necessarily challenge anybody and start a fight, but rather that sense of urgency to need to run because it looks dangerous. I must run or get away from here does not fire. And that's what we want to do. Encourage that sense of centeredness in the state of chaos that may be occurring in my environment, but not being part of the chaos. You can be within the chaos and not be chaotic, and not be part of it, and not necessarily have its influence running through you. So very important details once again. I want to tell you thank you for listening on this fine Sunday morning, actually. I forgot what day it was. And what I'd like to encourage you to do is go to YouTube and patronize my channel. I'm trying to get that to grow, have for several years, and YouTube is, for some reason, squelching the growth, but that's okay. Also have this podcast available on all platforms that you get your podcasts on. And my Running Man book is available on Amazon and is being sold internationally, which is such a cool thing. I've seen that it's been sold in India, in Spain, in the UK, of course here in the United States as well. And I'd like to see it continue to grow. At some point in time, we're going to be releasing a Spanish version. Also, we're going to be doing an audiobook version. I need to start working on that probably this coming fall. Lots going on, and we're working on volume 2. That's going to be more practical use of how to apply what you recover with this book. The Running Man book teaches you how to come back to yourself, how to take yourself out of the stress and recognize you within that and be able to maintain that sense of self. And then what do you do with it? Well, that's what the second book's going to be about, and I'll kind of explain more about it as we go in the future. But it's still in development at this point because it's a body of work. This first book is the foundation of all the other stuff that's going to come out, and consulting is probably going to be something that's coming in the near future as well. If you're interested in consult, please reach out to me at the Running Man Self-Regulation Skills email, and that is runningmangetskillsproject@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any feedback, holler at me there. But for now, thank you for listening. Take care of yourself and walk well.